Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me at the back? Am I audible? Oh, thank you. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. It's been, can you hear me? Okay, now? Thanks. It's a great honor to be a part of this forum, as well as the kind of audience we are used to seeing. A lot more jeans and t-shirts in our startup world. So really excited to be a part of something which is more representing a much larger industry. We have a span of 45 minutes to talk about a very important topic, at least for most of us sitting on the dais, and I'm sure of interest to all of you. Which is the whole evolution in some sense, and obviously the huge I would say growth of the startup ecosystem, and what does it mean for what has happened today, where is it going from here, and what do we need to do as an industry and as a overall ecosystem to encourage more growth of the startup world. Obviously the success is measured in some measures by terms like unicorns, soonicorns, and there are hundreds of those that have got built in the last decade. And of course, the whole euphoria that we are seeing in the world of IPOs, and we read yesterday that 15 companies are going IPO this week. Gaurav will talk about his journey and how it's going. So what we will do is, between us, we represent actually a very motley group of individuals who bring different perspectives to the same ecosystem. A very brief introduction of myself. I am a venture investor. I run a fund called Fireside Ventures, and we invest in consumer brands. I mean, our claim to fame is brands like Mamaearth, Port, Yoga Bar, and so on and so forth. So I have seen the journey of consumer brands, and before that as a tech investor with my previous fund Helion. So I can talk a little bit about how the evolution of the capital side of venture investing has evolved, and what does it mean and where can it go from here. But more interestingly, we have Gaurav, who's a founder of a consumer brand which probably represents one of a very iconic D2C success, and we'll talk about that. We have Muskan, who represents, again, a very interesting phenomena of platform which is changing the way the car servicing industry is evolving, and, especially the interest in EV. We'll also talk a little bit about, gender and the presence of more women in entrepreneurship. We have Mahesh, who represents the pharma and the biotech space, and is a professional manager who's come in to help build a company to the next level, and obviously there are some learnings there. And of course, Santosh is one of you. So we'll talk a little bit about his work, especially with academia. So let me start by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves and pose one question to them as a part of their introduction, which could then lead us to this discussion, and hopefully we'll open it up for the audience to join in. So let me start with Gaurav. Gaurav runs a brand called BlueStone, and he'll talk more about his journey. But what I would also request, Gaurav, is if you can talk a little bit about some of your learnings along the way of building an iconic brand, building a large business. The rumor is that you are going IPO this year. So, what has been your journey and how that can be applied to several entrepreneurs who might be in this room or who are looking to become entrepreneurs? If you could share that.
Sure, Kaval. Thanks. I'll try to cover a few of those from our. Hello. Yeah, I'll try to cover a few of those from our own journey. So I'm Gaurav. I'm founder and CEO of BlueStone. We started in 2012. At that time, e-commerce was picking up across categories. A lot of people were actually becoming retailer. So some were becoming specialized, let's say baby product retailers. Some were becoming specialized beauty product retailers, and so on. And at that time, I think we took a very not a very unconventional call. So we also decided that, okay, we'll use internet to sell jewelry. But I think one of the fundamental calls we took at that time was that we don't want to sell anyone else's jewelry. We want to create our own products. We want to create our own brand and then sell those online. which essentially, I think, which was the first hypothesis, which was the first call, and I think that worked out very well for us because marketplace model had never worked for gold and diamond jewelry in the country. I think the kind of marketplaces struggle to maintain quality, struggle to maintain genuineness of the jewelry, etc. And I think and with that we started. Now, therein lied the struggle also. None of us had any background in jewelry, so we all had to learn everything from the scratch and on the job. So we decided we created our own set of designs. We started working with a set of manufacturers, and very soon we realized that we cannot inventorize. This is a category where if we actually start piling up inventory, we'll run out of all the capital that we have. It just requires every piece of inventory is made of gold and diamond, and the working capital requirements are huge. And that too, when the sale volumes have not picked up, right? On internet, people expect you to give them a lot of choices. Now, if you were to keep everything in inventory to allow for that choice, and all the money that we have will actually go and just sit in the inventory. So so what we did was we decided that we'll do just-in-time manufacturing, and we would not have any MOQs. So in fact, when we were talking to a lot of manufacturers, they were saying, give us 10 pieces of this design, 20 pieces of this design. This brings efficiency in our manufacturing system. I said, I'm ready to pay you more, but I cannot have MOQs. Now that allowed us to actually experiment with a lot of designs, and which is what internet is very beautiful for. So we worked with a set of job workers and on a just-in-time manufacturing model. What we struggled with then was that the manufacturing times were typically 3 to 4 weeks, and we said this is just too much of a time for a person to wait after placing the order. So I think in 2014 we set up our own manufacturing, and we started producing everything in 3 to 5 days. And I mean, those were very new things for us. Manufacturing was actually looked down upon by a lot of investors, etc. That, okay, why do you actually need to get into something? It was also associated with a lot of trouble, labor department trouble, other department trouble, and so on. And typically all the VCP money was just flowing into clean internet businesses that you just do the internet, just do the white collar job and just get product from someone else and just ship it. So those kinds of businesses. So at that time, in that era, we were building a business all the way from design to manufacturing to technology, everything in-house. I think in hindsight, a lot of these things work for us, and a lot of D2C companies that are starting now are actually trying to go much deeper, trying to build a lot more full stack businesses, because they understand that let's say if you're doing manufacturing, what you can unlock in terms of quality, what you can unlock in terms of MOQs, what you can unlock in terms of experimentation is something that actually gives a lot of strength to you on the demand side in generating that demand and creating that differentiation. So that had been the journey till around 2015-16, and I think one of the big realization for us in around 2015-16 was, so online was growing. Online was growing at a pretty decent pace, but our conversion rates typically were very low. Our ticket size were high, and it was gold and diamond. So for people to trust an online portal to buy such stuff was just very difficult. So we spoke to a lot of users. In fact, we were seeing a strong uptick in browsing, but not that much uptick in sale. So for every one person who was buying, we saw many people who were actually browsing but not converting. We spoke to them, and I think they had their own set of challenges. They said, we love the designs, we love the fact that we can actually browse jewelry for almost a month, which you can't do in the offline world. If you go to a jeweler for a month every day and say, I just want to browse, don't want to buy anything, I don't think anyone would entertain you after a few days. So online gave that ability, online gave that experience to the customer, where you could actually spend 4 weeks looking at 3,000 designs of rings, which you can't do in an offline setup. It's like, it's a very traditional setup, over the counter setup, and not an aisle kind of a setup, especially in fine jewelry. So browsing was picking up, and when we spoke to customers, they said, how can we buy? So basically for people who were browsing but not buying, we spoke to them, they said, how can we buy something so expensive without touching and feeling it? Number two concern was, what do I do if, let's say, 2 years, 3 years down the line, I need to change the ring size, the diamond chips off, I need some minor repair, etc. And number three was old gold exchange. So if I want to exchange this design for a newer design, few years down the line, which is a very peculiar pattern in India, how do I do that? And I think with all those things, it became very obvious to us that the business that we are running is a fundamentally omni-channel business. A single purchase requires browsing, and I'm saying multi-session browsing or multi-week browsing, which can only be provided by online. And the same purchase also requires the comfort and experience of offline or of a store, like buying a car. all of you, if you or any of you, if you're thinking of buying a car these days, you'll actually, your journey will start online. You will research, you'll look at the photos, you look at the reviews, you look at all the specifications. But hardly anyone would actually click a buy now button online. You would still go to the dealership, you'll still look at the physical car and then make your purchase. So our category is fundamentally like that. So I think around 2017-18, when we started fixing the channel distribution, or rather when we started building the omni-channel channel distribution, the business has actually turned significantly.
Thanks, Gaurav. I think just one learning which we are seeing as a overall overarching learning in this whole journey of brands going from digital to offline is that the idea of offline and online is not two separate streams which never talk to each other. I think the real magic happens when you can integrate the two, and happy to probe that later in the discussion. Let me move to Muskan. Muskan actually represents a very interesting consumer tech platform where they are changing the way cars are being serviced, and obviously with the growth of the industry and the whole advent into EV, some very interesting learnings there. But the question I would ask you, Muskan, to add on to your introduction is also some experience around a business where they went through almost a near-death experience. And how do you, then revive the business? How do you bring in fresh management and almost, pivot it into something very, very unique, and especially with the new management change, if you can talk about that as your learnings.
Sure. Thank you, Kaval. So, hi everyone, my name is Muskan Kakkar. I run a brand called GoMechanic, which is into car care solutions. So, first of all, thank you AIMA for having me here, and thank you Mr. Sunil Kanwaljit for having me here with such great leaders of the industry. As Kaval asked that, the startup, the GoMechanic company itself was almost dying, if I talk about last year, and how from company which was a sinking ship is now last quarter has become EBITDA positive. So I think a lot of things matter when you're running a startup, and the kind of experience you carry. I come from a very different industry, and when I came into automotive, I myself was not very sure whether people will accept me as a woman of this industry or not, because hardly it's a 99% men dominating industry, right? But when people accept you as as a leader, when they think that even if you're coming from different industry and you will be able to pivot the company, because at the end of the day, consumer is still the same. Consumer's life doesn't change what's happening at the startup level. If you're providing the service to the consumer, the startup keeps on going on, right? But when me and my co-founder we came up with a different thought. We said that we are going to talk about customer journey now. We literally focused on how can we improve the customer journey rather than acquiring more customers. And thanks to our investors, which is Lifelong, Hero, and Fireside Ventures, so they literally trusted us by saying that we do not need an exponential growth in the business, but we need the business which is more sustainable, the business which can stay there forever. So that's how we also were not doing an exponential growth, but was making the business so smart, so sustainable, and wanted to know what the customer is looking for in the market. And hence we focused on customer journey. We literally, went into into our garages, wherein we understood what the customer need is, what is the customer expectation out of, the car care services when he's not going to OEM and when he's coming to aftermarket brand, which is GoMechanic and, few others in the market today. So when we got into that era, and that is how I think we were able to sustain ourselves in the market. When we took over the company, we were sitting at around 23% of the repeat ratio. And today, if you ask me, within 16 months of journey, we have reached the customer retention rate of 51%. And I think when you reach at that rate where customer starts to come back to us, come back to you, that is where you think you're trying to create a sustainable business. And I think in today's era, investors should literally think that slowly and steadily you can do a business which can have a sustainable growth rather than having, numbers which are not very sustainable and which will not stay for a long time. That's my experience on this.
Thank you. I think sustainable business is a topic in itself, and we really want to talk about more as we progress into this discussion. But there is a role that investors have to play in, like Muskan called out. I'll quickly go to Mahesh just to get the ball rolling. Mahesh represents a completely different industry, and he will talk about his own experience. And I think the key question which we would love for Mahesh to answer is this whole business of bringing in professional management to take a company to the next level, and how he's seen that journey for himself, and then talk a little bit about the industry and some challenges that he's seeing in the industry.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, AIMA, for inviting me. I think it's a wonderful forum to be here to talk about such diverse topics and learn a lot while sharing as well. So I come from a background, as was mentioned, from the pharmaceutical biotech industry, something that we hear a lot about and we got to know a lot more in the last few years with COVID. I've spent about 20 years in the US. I did my PhD there and I worked for a few different companies, both small and large, while I was in the US. One of the things that did, and is worth mentioning, is actually gave me exposure to what we consider as high level of innovation, high level of standards, and a high degree of patient centricity, because those are the core components of success for the US pharmaceutical industry. I've then moved to India, and in India I've had the opportunity to actually work for 4 different companies, each being a poster child of what a startup can do after they've decided to move on in their journey. The first company that I started working for is still today is one of the oldest vaccine manufacturers in India. I've continued to operate as a privately owned company run by the founders or run by the founders' family. The next company that I worked for is a company called Shanta Biotechniques, which was sold to Sanofi, which is a French pharmaceutical giant. So, when you look at the textbook ways of how exits can happen for founders, this is where they found a strategic partner or a strategic investor, sold, and then, of course, the founders were able to exit out of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of the exit strategies and each of the journeys of this whole enterprise and the opportunity that comes in. After about spending, I think, 6 years or so at Sanofi, I actually moved to another company called Syngene. Syngene is India's largest CRO CDMO of its type, which is an IPO'd company. So it was founded by the Biocon family founders of Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, and then went to IPO it and is still today run as a public company. So it's another different way for the founders to exit. And today I now lead, earlier this year I joined Veeda, and I lead Veeda, which is today a clinical research company where we do clinical trials to study the efficacy, the potency, the safety of drugs. This is now today actually owned by private equity. So here's a completely other different exit strategy that the founders chose. The founders still hold some level of stock and some ownership in the company. But they've also gone through a buy and build approach where they've, since the private equities come in, gone and done a few more acquisitions. So as I look back at this journey of where there's different approaches taken on by the founders to exit, what are the things that sort of come to mind is, it's very important to know the why, the what, and the how. The why is, why are you exiting? Is it because you just want to retire? Is it because you want a windfall? Is it because you're tired? Is it because you don't see growth? That clarity is absolutely, absolutely important. The second is, of course, the component of what are you going to do after you've exited? As founders, there is a tendency to say, well, I will do this, this, and this, without having that full clarity with the new investment community that has come in, whether it's private equity, whether it's public shareholding, whether it is a strategic, and therefore that clarity of what it is that you are going to do. So the how, the why, the what, and then the how. I think it's also very important that you go through and prepare the company for that transition. How are you actually going to get into this strategy of selling the business What kind of window dressing are you going to do? What kind of financial statements are you going to prepare? What kind of processes are you going to build? Because all of these actually matter in terms of the experience that you go through, not just during the process of due diligence and not just during the process of the transaction, but for many, many more years to come, depending on what kind of stakeholding and what kind of ownership and what kind of relationship you want to have with the entity that has been the baby, right? So each of these are very, very different ways by which you can look at and say, in case of, I'll just give a little bit more of an example. In the example that I mentioned of Shanta Biotechnics, which was sold to Sanofi, unfortunately, the product that it was bought by Sanofi for had some problems and it had to be taken off the market for some period of time. That led to a huge loss in terms of the revenue for the next 5 years and complete change in plans from Sanofi with regards to how the company has to be now run. These are the kinds of things that need to be thought through, saying, what are my risks associated with this? And how am I prepared for this? And what's my transition team? What's my integration team? I think the journey is even more challenging when it comes to this particular, you mentioned about talking about the pharma sector. I think it's even more challenging when it comes to the pharma sector, because in the pharma sector, most important thing to realize is these are investments that have to be taken from a long-term perspective. It's not a short-term get in, get out with a high growth rate opportunity. So you have to come with the right mindset, and then you need to prepare for the transaction so that you can actually realize those, plus have your risk mitigation in place. And I think those are the kinds of learnings that I wanted to share at the outset, just to talk about what the pharma specifically brings and the different ways that exit strategies can be thought about.
Thanks, Mahesh. So maybe just to quickly summarize some 3 or 4 high-level, I think, common themes, and then I'll go to Santosh and get his inputs. I think while all of us celebrate the whole excitement around unicorns and unicorns and IPOs, clearly all of us in our own ways have realized that these are not things which will just happen flash in the pan overnight. There is a method to the madness. There is clearly patient both founder mindset and capital required. And I think that's been one of my own learnings, having been in the industry as an investor for the last 25 years, that if you try to accelerate the pace of growth at any cost, you'll see more negatives than positives. So building sustainable businesses, realizing when you need to bring in fresh management talent, when you switch from being a founder to a manager, or are you even ready to do that transition? And building a sustainable and a path to profit, and then eventually running a profitable business. I think these are very simple, basic norms, which as an industry, we have seen both good and bad examples. And that then brings me to Santosh. He's seen, a very interesting phase of not just corporate life, but also working with academia. So Santosh, you could talk about a little bit of your background and also some role that you're seeing academia particularly is playing in helping promote this whole startup ecosystem.
Sure. Thank you, Kanwaljit, and thank you, AIMA, for having me here. I wear 2 different hats. One is as part of the AIMA YLC, I'm the national chairman, but today in this panel, Kanwal has asked me to speak more from the academic angle. I have a day job with SP Jain Institute of Research and Management, which is one of the top B schools. And here we are building Vice Tech Center, which is standing there for the responsible innovation, right? So we're looking at how do we really bring in the intervention of academia, industry and innovation together, right? That's the cusp where we are standing today. And I think academia has a very interesting role to play to really get the grassroots level innovation out into a business innovation, right? And you can have these ideathons, but what do we make out of those ideathons comes into our play area, I would say. So a few things that we've done in the last year or so, I'll probably share that. We run 2 accelerators. One accelerator is on the fintech side, which is called Finovate. That's a brand that we run. And we also are running another accelerator, a startup accelerator at sustainability space. That's christened as Earth Lab. But beyond this, what we realize is there's a backward integration that we need to do in terms of really going into the idea stage startups and help them really build a better business plan. Because it's an evolutionary journey for the startup founders as well, right? Like Muskan said, the startups goes through a lot of ups and downs, but it's also important for the startup founders to really understand how to build your first plan in a better way. And probably that's the role that we intend to play. And it's not just us. I've been in touch with various other institutions of importance in India, and everybody is trying to help founders, at different stages of their journey, right? I mean, it could be the IIMs, the IITs. Each and every one is looking at building that really core focus innovation agenda there. And I think that's an important area for the academia to really step in and step up to not just be in the tier ones of the country, but also take it to the Bharats of the country, right? Really go to the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. And as part of that playbook, we're also looking at building a larger community across the country. We are really going into the hinterlands and creating more, the ecosystem enablement network there. As investors are ecosystem enablers, we find ourselves to be another enabler in the whole journey. And like I said, it could be incubation, acceleration, and at some point in time, we might want to emulate our Western counterparts in terms of creating our own VC fund. Maybe 12, 18 months into the journey, we might want to be doing that first check to our founders as well, because that's important not just to inculcate a good governance habit, but also to fund them out, create a seed fund environment where they're more comfortable to talk to us because we've seen their journey early on, and be a patient capital with them, because we don't need to really look at our LPs to pay back something, but it can be more patient as a capital to create a much more fungible kind of a journey for the early stage ventures. That's where we are currently stepping into in our journey. I think academia for me has a very important role to play, and for the country, if you look at it, we have a 15, 18 year kind of a startup journey now. That history is proven. We have IPOs. Delhi stands as one of the prime examples, with 78% of the IPOs being from Delhi. Bangalore has a huge private equity VC capital ecosystem. So the investments are there, the founders have grown the companies, we've seen how the trajectories are there, and we've also seen the ups and downs of the whole startup ecosystem and the funding winter that we are currently going through. But we also feel that this is the right time for academia to really step on the gas and be that change maker. Instead of just being a pure theoretical enabler, we can actually be that practical partner to the startup ecosystem. That's how I see academia.
Thanks, Santosh. So in the interest of time, maybe I'll take another 5 minutes with the panel on one question which everybody's been asking. Is this really a flash in the pan? Something magical happened? Or was it COVID? Was it some kind of a, twist in the story? And we suddenly have all these unicorns. So what does the future look like? I mean, do we still see enough opportunities for building exciting brands, exciting businesses? Can we get hundreds and thousands of more large businesses which are sustainable out there? So we thought we will get the panel's input, maybe just a minute each, on what do you see as the next big opportunity in your space or in the areas that you're working with, which could lead to the next generation of large unicorn businesses to get built. And then we will, talk a little bit about what do we need to happen to make that successful, and hopefully take a few questions if we have time. Yeah. Maybe I'll start with Mahesh first.
Thanks. I think it's a very important question. How do we move forward from here? And I'll start with I won't make this very long, but I'll give some examples and some numbers, right? So when we look at the Indian landscape, we say that we are the third largest ecosystem in the world for unicorns. But the gap that we have between the US, which is the number 1, and India, which is number 3, is huge. And one of the components is the ecosystem, which is what we heard from Santosh. The academics need to play a very, very important role. The other one that is very important for the pharma sector to actually progress is when you start to look at the list of 115 unicorns or the 112 sunicorns that are called out today in India, there's less than 5 totally that are anywhere close to the pharma biotech sector. Now, why is that? It's one that does need a lot of delving into from an understanding perspective. It's about the ecosystem. Do we have the good connect between the innovation that's happening in the academia and what needs to translate that into actual medicines that we bring to the market? It also needs those deep pockets of saying, well, this is not something that's, get fast rich scheme. It does need a lot more stability, it does need a lot of sustainability, the kinds of things that Muskan was talking about. The other bit that is very important is to recognize that on one hand, we say that the opportunity is huge because we are the pharmacy of the world. That pharmacy of the world translates to us being the third largest manufacturer of generic medicine, the third largest manufacturer of medicines in the world, to the extent of where 90% of measles vaccine that WHO buys, who's the largest buyer, buys from India. So we have some of these opportunities, but these are not on the innovation scale. So therefore, we don't actually translate any of these opportunities into innovation, and we don't create any unicorns or unicorns in this particular space. That deep pockets, that ecosystem, and the partnering with the government, the partnering with the enterprises who can actually push for stability, push for comfort and confidence of the founders to be in the journey for the long run is absolutely critical for us to actually progress in the opportunity that we have in the pharma space. You know, precision medicine is something that's becoming very, very common. There's drugs that are today upwards of $2.5 billion a treatment. Those are the kinds of opportunities that we have to actually bring those drugs into India, innovate that kind of, and bring the cost of those drugs down so that it's available to the Indian population. However, it does need all of these components that I think we need to put together to make sure that we can build on these opportunities.
Santosh?
So what's interesting is, there are different names that are being given out there. A year back, we were talking about the cockroach startup journey, right? And you don't get better than that. You can survive and thrive and continue to evolve as a journey. And then over the last 2 months, there's been a lot of buzz around the gazelles and the cheetahs. All right. So my point of view is that looking at, do we really want to be only looking at that? A capital as a moat kind of a innovation industry, or can we look at beyond that? I think for India as a country where we're looking at the next 2 decades being owned by us, and there's a larger opportunity for us to build not just one side of the ecosystem in terms of building that capital moat to create innovation out in the market, but also beyond capital, are there other moats that we can build as a country? Like he said, there could be a need for patient capital in the deep tech world, whether you talk about the space tech, health tech, all of these need much longer gestation period. And as we look at gestation period, it also needs a very patient capital to back that out and not just really push the founders to look at the hockey stick curve all the time. That will come in by virtue of just being in the user journey. But I think for the initial phase, you might need to look at each sector may have a different need. And as an investor, right, you've been supporting the consumer startups as there. So, each of them, each sector will have its own flavors, nuances, and challenges. And accordingly, as a country, if we can really step up to the curve and build that out, kind of a moat for each of them, and the world is is at our disposal to really sell it out today, right? It's no more we are cocooned and we have to be in a license Raj kind of an era. We are really looking at our startups are, in terms of SaaS, for example, right? We are one of the proliferated, much spoken about startup ecosystem. Folks sitting out of Chennai are selling their wares without even stepping into the valley in the US, right? So there are a lot of these cross connects that are available there. I think for us, if we can really create that more cohesive sectoral approach, not just paint everybody in the same brush, maybe will be more meaningful, I would say. Thank you.
Great. Let me get quick input from Muskan and then Gaurav, and maybe open it up for some questions.
So I think the next biggest unicorn can come from 3 areas. If you ask me today, I think circular economy has got a very big strength, wherein, if we are able to get a company who can recreate or refurb the engines of the car, auto parts can be refurbed, and simultaneously the batteries, the EV batteries can be refurbed. That kind of infrastructure, if we can can become a next unicorn. And also, I think in health tech is also going to become a very big part of this ecosystem. In COVID, of course, we tried our level best that we come up with new technology of healthcare tech and AI and diagnostic tools, but we just still scratch the surface. We have a long way to go. So if companies who can promote the health tech care can also become the next unicorn. And I think the third very powerful tool is the renewable sources. If we can use the renewable sources better, like today, India is one of the country who is producing the cheapest solar power. And I think from that perspective also, if we have some new ideas wherein we can use the source of renewable sources as a part of the energy channel, can become the next big unicorn who is going to sustain in this system for a very long duration.
So yeah, I think there'll be plenty of great companies that will get built over time. But so the specific sector, which is the consumer brands, etc., which is where we also deal, I see a lot of opportunity, a lot of green shoots in that. So essentially, okay, if we just think about this, when was the last time, let's say, a mattress brand was created in the country? We have Kurlon, we had Sleepwell for 30, 40, 50 years, and there was no action, absolutely no action. And suddenly we see Wakefit, Sleep Company, and a couple more actually making inroads into that and making good businesses. Similarly, let's say the luggage and travel accessories. We had Safari, we had VIP, and they were going on for 30, 40, 50 years, and suddenly we have Mokobara, we have Uppercase, we have Nasher Miles, we have few other. And that's happening across the categories. So I think, and it has started happening a lot more at a lot rapid pace in last 3 to 4 years. And I look at that and I say, and in a way we have done that in jewelry. If you look at most of the jewelry brand in the country, they have been built over 3 or 4 generations, and we have built a pretty formidable and national brand in 10 to 12 years. And I think internet has a very strong role to play in almost all of those. It's at a center of it. And if you look at it, so for most of the traditional brands, in fact, brands which have been built over generation, they more typically was distribution and marketing, because distribution was already established and it was not easy for an upstart to actually crack that distribution in a physical world, in a world without internet. And similarly, marketing, TV used to be the most efficient ways of marketing. Now, internet disrupted that distribution. So let's say if you have a $10 billion market, we have companies, or we have e-commerce layer already established for all the D2C players to use. So you can use delivery e-commerce, you can use payment gateways like Razorpay, etc., and you can use Shopify to actually quickly set up the entire funnel from order to delivery, and you can reach out to 5-10% of the market. And after that, offline distribution also opens up, because you have access to capital, you have confidence on the product market fit, etc. is right. And secondly, I think the way big FMCG or the traditional companies typically played was, okay, they would create a product, they will spend 1 or 2 years to create a product, they will market it on TV, and then they would distribute it through their existing distribution channel. With most of the quality audience moving away from TV to OTT, that TV as a cheap way of marketing is also dead. So I think that's what's causing this disruption. And 10 to 15 years down the line, I think not only in these two categories, but across all the categories, the branded landscape of India would be significantly different. I see that as a huge opportunity.
So I think, I don't know how much time we have, but maybe I can just summarize a little bit of this discussion, and then see if we have time for questions, and then Satosh, of course, will be our final concluding remarks. I think the interesting thing which brings us here and bring all of you on in this room is that India is a very, very unique situation at this point of time in the global ecosystem. It's a great opportunity to build businesses, and infrastructure is improving, more government support, capital is coming in, both domestic and international, and lots of spaces that we talked about. I think the opportunity needs to be managed through a combination of both sustainable, responsible business building and investing. And I think that's been the biggest learning for me as an investor for the last 10 years, that, we have seen some, irrational behavior on different fronts. How do you make sure that you can build a sustainable ecosystem for growth? Then you can really build very large companies. And the question we ask ourselves is that why does it have to be only celebrated unicorns and soonicorns? Because the fact is India can have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of very successful self-running and self-managed businesses. And what does it take to promote that kind of an ethos and an ecosystem? So there are some questions that all of us need to collectively address. But one thing is for sure, the opportunity is phenomenal. And, we are all lucky to be at this point of time in an economy which is giving us so much of opportunity.